Hey everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 10, if we're thinking about it from a non-shorts perspective. In today's episode, I'm joined by the amazing team from OnThe Chicane, so Paris and Maryam. It's an absolute pleasure to have them on the show. They've been working on their podcast, which has a lot more success than mine, if I'm honest, and I'm kind of jealous, but in a good way. And they've been discussing everything from race recaps, race reviews, as well as in-depth conversations in and around the paddock. So it's a pleasure to have them. Thank you, team, for coming on. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having us on. It's always nice to kind of collaborate with other content creators in the F1 sphere. So thank you for reaching out to us and having us on. It's great for us.
You're
Yeah,
more than
sorry, I was just gonna echo what Paris has said. It is great to be on here, great to collaborate with you, and yeah, I mean, it's just nice to work with other people, other coloured, like people of colours
I'm
on
with you.
in this space. I think it's just obviously we're a minority, so it's nice to be able to, yeah.
No, absolutely. And there is something that that's not going to come out on the air. No, I've spoken to Denny about this, so I'll talk to you both afterwards. But I guess first things first, where did On the Chicane start? Like, for any of my listeners that haven't heard your podcast, please do go check it out. Where did the idea start? Where did the concept come from? What do you do?
Go for it, man.
Um, I guess so. We started off, Paris and I connected last year, so 2021, I
Yeah.
Yeah.
believe. We were literally, someone sent me, I already had an existing platform on Instagram and Twitter, and Paris had put out a tweet looking for another content creator to kind of collaborate with and do YouTube videos and this kind of thing.
Nice.
And someone sent me her tweet and was like, hey, like this might be useful for you. And literally, like, I connected with Paris and it was an instant connection. Like, we both just kind of hit it off straight away. And I
Honestly,
was
it's
like,
like the best Tinder date that you could have ever gone on.
it was so good. So we kind of got to talking, planned on the chicane, and I did a rebrand of what was already existing of my pages, and we kind of launched onto YouTube as well. And since then, it's been difficult because we both work in very demanding jobs. And I guess balancing something like this with work and also your personal life, where you've also got XYZ going on, is so difficult. So we have struggled, but we're still going. I don't really know how, to be honest, because it's been tough. But yeah, here we are, almost, well, 2 seasons later, and hopefully with new and exciting things to come next season.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
mean, just to add to and echo what Mariam said, I think for us it's just been about kind of trying to put something out consistently and try to connect with as many people as we can, even if as Mariam said, like we've been very, very busy in our personal lives, but it's something that we're both really passionate about and just trying to have a presence, even if it isn't the, most flashiest content out there, but just trying to be really grounded and really honest with it is kind of where we are at.
Well, I think it's interesting you both said that because when you talk about struggle, we looking from the outside, it actually looks like success. So pat yourselves on the back for that. It doesn't look like any form of struggle from the outside. So anyone that is listening, don't take their word for it. They're doing amazing. They're thriving. Um, I guess with that, let's sort of see how we could roll into Abu Dhabi. So the 2022 championship season for F1 is over. Thank goodness. If I'm honest, I'm not exhausted. I'm exhausted by the stories in and around the paddock of one particular team and technical directives and cost cap gates and etc. And don't get me
I'll
wrong,
say it's been a bittersweet year, right? It's like
it's
you're
so
kind of sad
hard.
to see it go because you never want F1 to end, but at the
Yeah,
same time, you're like, yeah, thank God.
this is the thing. Like I don't know about you both, but I felt like it wasn't a season where, and this isn't just because Lewis wasn't like winning a race or anything like that, but it wasn't a season which had a bit of avavum. Like it started with that. We had Bahrain, we had Australia, where Charles and Max were going at it. And don't get me wrong, not a Max fan, but it was good to see that battle. Then it just died, and you're thinking, well, this is Max's to lose by Miami because Ferrari aren't going to get themselves together. unfortunately. I'm
Honestly,
sorry.
the whole year wrapped up so quickly. It was just, you know, over in the blink of an eye, or like you said, the excitement from the first
Mm,
few races. And we were like, yeah, for because remember at the beginning of the year, Ferrari had the better car.
yeah,
So it wasn't even just Max and Charles kind of going at it. Ferrari legitimately had the best car on the grid at the beginning of the year because
yeah,
the Red Bull had, I think, in the first four races they had like three DNFs or like
yes,
two like it was a lot of mechanical issues. So at the beginning of the year, you're like, cool, this is going to be a good
yeah, yeah.
season.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know what happened. Well, we know what happened, but I don't know how it happened so quickly. And I think when we saw, and I'm a Ferrari fan, by the way, before you get at me, Mariam, because I don't I don't want to start any issues on the show. But I think when we saw Carlos spin in Australia, we knew it was going to be a long year. And it was just like, okay, what's going to happen, And then Azerbaijan with Charles's engine in Spain, and it didn't provide that conclusion to Abu Dhabi that we would have hoped for. Not that we hoped for last year, because last year was a farce, but we would have hoped for a similar type of battle. Now, thinking about Abu Dhabi recently, I know you have your race review to do, so I'm not going to try and impede on that. But what would you say were the main sort of talking points for yourselves when watching the race?
Obviously, I think the biggest talking point from I guess a championship perspective was seeing what was going to play out between Leclerc and Perez. Obviously, the weekend before, Perez kind of had a chance to gain on Leclerc, and because of his teammate, he lost out quite massively. And then they went into Abu Dhabi on equal footing. But then there was a lot of question around who would come out on top because Ferrari haven't had the most reliable engines and they haven't just had any consistency really. Sometimes like Leclerc has a really bad race, sometimes Sainz. So kind of I think everyone, even in my group chat at work, I kind of did a poll and I was like, who do you expect to come out on top, Perez or Leclerc? And everyone said Perez because they had the better pace, like just generally throughout the season.
Yes.
So I think that was one of the biggest talking points. And obviously the result was that Leclerc came out on top, and it was from that you kind of then question what happened with Max the weekend before and why he didn't kind of help his teammate out. So that was a really big thing. And then I guess if you looked at the championship standings, you had like Aston and Alpha who were like I think 5 points away from like kind of beating one another. They ended up actually on equal points, but on count back, Alpha came out on top of Aston. So that was a bit of a tight competition there. And then it was just obviously there are other talking points about like people leaving the sport. Like it was Seb Vettel's last weekend, so that was a massive thing, quite emotional.
Really emotional.
And then you've got Ricardo leaving, Latifi, Schumacher. So quite a lot of people left the sport as well. So yeah.
I mean, what Mariam said. I think you covered most of it. I can't add to it because that was a great summary of everything to look forward, or we had to look forward to on the weekend. Some of it I think came off really well at the end of it. Seb's all of the celebrations for him getting to do the donuts, even though obviously he wasn't one of the top three, but just like that kind of hype around that whole leaving part. But then obviously you had Perez and Charles and what we were looking forward to. But to be honest, I feel like that was a bit of a hyped up battle. I don't even think it had as much chops in it as I think what made that interesting was Max's comment from the weekend before. Otherwise, we would have just been like, it is what it is.
See, it's an interesting one that you touched on there, because I think and I'm not going to get into the whole semantics of it because I know you covered it quite a bit last week, but with Max deciding and making an outward statement, leave me alone, this is my decision, effectively paraphrasing, who's in control at Red Bull? And this, I don't want to get sued, please don't come after me, but is it the driver? Is it the strategy team led by Hannah Schmidt? And I think she's brilliant. Is it the aero team, who seems to hold quite a considerable influence through Mr. Adrian Newey, one of the greatest of all time, before someone else tweets something that we don't need. Or is it actually the team bosses like Christian Horner and Marco? Because for me, it's a driver-led sport, but it's not a driver-led organization. But Red Bull come across as, this is my team, I'm Max Verstappen, I'm doing what I want, get behind me or duck out. Right. I don't know what your thoughts are.
It's what he's been fed, isn't it? He's been a part of the Red Bull family first as Toro Rosso and then as Red Bull since he came into Formula One. So he's never known anything different. And when he came into Toro Rosso, he was the youngest driver ever. He was only 17. He had a lot to learn, and we all know that and we all saw that. But I think there's a certain level of entitlement and ego that comes from that. And some of it is, of course, like based in fact, and he's an incredible driver, and as much as we do criticize him a lot, we never take that away from him. He is an incredible driver. I think it can just become a thing where he thrives on being the central person, and that they give that to him because he delivers. So I blame Horner. When you got a bad child, you blame the parent thing. To me, it's very similar to that.
It's interesting that you touched on the sort of entitlement aspect, because I'm thinking of other sort of golden kids who entered the sport. Seb Vettel, when he was with Sauber BMW, Lewis with McLaren, Mercedes. Who else was there? There was someone else who came in quite touted at like an early age. It wasn't super young, but in terms of how their careers were handled, Lewis was kept under like a strict PR regime by Ron Dennis. Seb Vettel was sort of taken under Michael Schumacher's wing, and Michael, we all know, had his outbursts, but he was very like, this is what we're doing it this way, keep your mouth shut, basically. Do you think Max would face that same sort of issue if he was at a different team? I'm not saying that he's going to go to Mercedes, because I think that bridge has gone. We heard the Silverstone comments last year, but if he was at a different team, would he be allowed to express himself the same way? Or do you think that the team would come first, as we saw with Alpine in Brazil?
Oh, that's really difficult to comment on, because I feel like Max and Red Bull are one. They kind of come as a package, and you can't really imagine Max without Red Bull or Red Bull without Max. Actually, I can imagine Red Bull without Max, but I can't imagine Max without Red Bull. So I don't know. I feel like because of how long Max has been within the whole Red Bull program, that's kind of like a relationship that's kind of turned into a Max is their golden boy. Whereas I feel like if he was to have that same attitude going fresh into a new team, like let's say for some reason he's gone to Alpine, I don't think that would run. But if he was with Alpine for a long period of time, then potentially. But also you have to take into consideration like everything that Max has achieved, and it's probably kind of gone to his head, because he has got records under his belt. He broke Seb Vettel's record, I think, this season in Abu Dhabi of like most race wins in a season, or most poles or something. I can't remember what it was. And now he's a two-time as well. So he's got all these records under his belt. So it is kind of going to his head. So I feel like it's because of him coming through and having that long-standing relationship with Red Bull, which might not stand if he was to switch to another team. But then that being said, I can't imagine that ever happening, because he's just Red Bull. Like Max is Red Bull.
Yeah.
I think he said in an interview this weekend that he wants to retire at 31. I don't know where they got the number 31 from. I don't know if he actually said the number 31, but he said he wants to retire like within a certain amount of years. And I think my calculations may be correct. He's 25 now, 31's in 6 years. He has a contract, I believe, until 2027. It could be 2029, which is about 5 years from now. So, my understanding is that he's planning to spend his entire career at Red Bull. He is not looking elsewhere. He's not, and who knows, if Red Bull stop delivering a championship fighting car, whether or not that will change. But weirdly, I actually feel like he would be really loyal to Red Bull even if they weren't performing. I think he's had too much success and too much being the center of the world at Red Bull. like Mariam said, I can't imagine him somewhere else. I can't imagine him wanting to put himself in the uncomfortable position of having to prove himself somewhere else.
That's an interesting segue, touching on the sort of uncomfortable position, because I think you've both mentioned that he's sort of symbiotic with Red Bull, right? Like you can't see him anywhere else. But I felt the same way with Sebastian Vettel at Red Bull. Like he was that guy. He was. You know,
he got 4 world
championships
with them, so it's not even like Max has only got 2 yet. So
wow, subjective, but yeah,
like I said,
I know what you mean. No,
yeah,
yeah.
Who knows?
but I do think it's interesting to sort of see that play out, and I think it, just touching on your comment about his deal expiring. Red Bull have always put their fastest drivers first. We've seen it with Seb Vettel over Webber. We saw it with Ricciardo over Vettel, unfortunately. Although I love Danny Rick. And then we saw it with Max over Danny Rick. So I'm just wondering, and this is just me, there could be a point in time where someone comes in, let's say Iwasa, for example, and absolutely dominates from the off with like unrivaled speed. Sorry, that's my dog in the background.
Can't hear him.
Oh, amazing. That's the anti-dog stuff working on Zoom. Dominates, let's say, Max, for example, or makes a really good impression, and all of a sudden Max is benchmarked to number 2. Could we then see someone like Max to leave the sport a little bit early, do a Sebastian Vettel or Daniel Ricciardo? Or
I can imagine it, but it depends on how he progresses over the next years, and it depends on how cutthroat Christian Horner is, because I don't think, weirdly, as much as like I remember the Seb Vettel days, this is what created my like hatred of Horner is like the Seb Vettel days. Ask Mariam, from the first conversation we had, I was like, yeah, I hate Red Bull, I hate Christian Horner. This is before Max, this is before 2021 even happened.
Fair.
So I always thought Christian Horner was a weasel. I just really couldn't stand his very strong feelings towards this. But it's more just the way he presented himself. He was always the pantomime villain, even like I said, long before 2021. I think it just got highlighted in 2021 because it was like the central plot line to the Formula One saga. So, you know, even during that whole time with him and Seb Vettel, and I think even people might forget, but Seb was actually demonized as well at the time because, you know, he always used to do the one finger, and there's lots and lots of things he did whilst he was a part of Red Bull that really got under people's skin and got on people's nerves. And I think perhaps it's just something about Red Bull that kind of creates that kind of aura and that kind of a person. But then you have Daniel Ricciardo, who was an absolute lovely person, who knows. So I think like when it comes to Red Bull, they can be very cutthroat and they can like make themselves very unlikable. But I can't imagine Christian Horner doing that to Max. I can't imagine, even if someone brand new came through and was like the fastest driver ever, killed all of Lewis Hamilton, every young person's record, everything. I can't imagine them doing it to Max.
Ooh. Mario, what's your thoughts? Because that's a statement for sure.
I don't know. I feel like if someone was to come through the ranks and be better than Max, I feel like just because of the kind of person that he's portrayed himself to be, he would leave simply out of just kind of throwing a tantrum, being stroppy. I think he would leave. But it's also got me thinking, like at the end of his race on Sunday, he was talking to whoever was conducting the interviews, and he said, he was like, you know, I'm at a stage now where I've achieved 2 championships. It's more than I could have hoped for, and I am kind of already thinking like, what's more important? Is it my family or is it racing? Like, I don't know how much longer I want to do this. So it goes back to Paris's point of however long he's got left in his contract. Maybe that is just how long he plans to stay within the sport. So I feel like, and also like, he's achieved something pretty amazing, right? Like he's got 2 world championship titles. Like it's not the most, obviously. I imagine someone like him would want to go and beat Lewis, but I also have a feeling that if he was kind of pushed out because of, let's say, Iwasa coming through and being better than him, then I feel like he'd kind of give it a bit more, try, and if he couldn't quite get there, I do think he would just leave and just be like, "Nah, I'm done." So yeah, I don't know. There's something about, but yeah, I guess going back to the other point that Paris made, like I can't see him going to any other team because I do think he is loyal to Red Bull and Horner.
Yeah, I think the faith that they showed in him, that you both have just touched on, is, I mean, it's unparalleled, right? Who comes into the sport, testing at 16, jumps in the car at 17, regardless of money or anything. They skipped F3. No, sorry, they did one race in F3 or two races in F3, skipped F2 or whatever it was at the time, and then just parachuted them in. Like the super licenses points came as a result of Max skipping the queue. That's insane. So I guess, yeah, I'm with you both on that. Just sort of segueing away, because I know that time is against us. When it comes to two of our favourite people leaving the sport, in Daniel Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel, it was quite emotional on Sunday. So I was at my parents' house watching it, and you know, it's the same place where I saw both of them make their debuts, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, one, I'm getting older, which is crazy, but two, we're actually losing two characters from the paddock who bring a different, I think, sense of enjoyment. Right, we've got Lewis, who is fantastic in every aspect, and that's not me trying to sort of put a shine on him, but when you've got Daniel Ricciardo, who is the face of Netflix, essentially, like what's going to happen when he goes, and Seb Vettel, who has campaigned for so many different causes in and around the paddock and outside as well. Where do we go from here? Like, who's going to sort of step up and take that mantle, or even how do we feel about them leaving?
It's really sad, for one. Like, I guess touching on Seb, I'm like one of his biggest fans. I've always been a really big fan of Seb's since I started kind of watching the sport. Like instantly I was just attracted to Seb and who he was. And I think over the last 2 years, since he's kind of joined Aston Martin, he's had a shift in his mentality, and he's realized that like there is so much more to the world than just racing. There's so much to be conscious about. And I think in terms of, as you just said, the fact that he's campaigned for so many different causes, in terms of that, we are losing a really vital voice within the sport, because there aren't many people who do speak up like Lewis, like Seb, and yeah, who else is there? So I think it's really sad to be losing someone like Seb, and I can only hope that there's some sort of link between whatever he plans to do next and racing, so that he can kind of keep pushing for those causes and kind of trying to help the environment. Obviously, I think the environment is one of his biggest causes that he's passionate about. So I do genuinely think that he is a massive loss to the sport, and I also think when it comes to Lewis retiring, that will also be a huge loss, simply because they look beyond the scope of what this bubble of Formula One. They look outside to the actual real world and see all these other things that are going on. There aren't many other drivers who do that. They're all kind of enjoying their lives, getting all this money, living their best life, and not really,
because they're quite young, aren't they? So you know,
they are. So you can't really blame them.
Got to that level of evolved thinking.
Maturity, that's the thing. Like Seb and Lewis are much older than them too, and they've already had their kind of F-boy years and like lived their life within like with their money, and kind of, you know, splurged and realized what's important. So like I do think it's a massive loss, and I can only hope, like as Seb said within like his leaving speech, he was like, I can only hope that some of the people that I've worked with can carry on some of what I've started. But I guess even like Ricciardo, like he's just got such a great personality. Like everyone loves him. You're drawn to that smile. And I think going back to Ricciardo at Red Bull, I've said this on our own like channel so many times, I always thought Danny Rick was world championship material. I always thought he had it within him to at least win 1 or 2 titles and just, you know, kind of dominate. And I'm really sad that we haven't seen that happen, that he hasn't had the right opportunities for that to happen, because once upon a time he was bloody brilliant, and I still think he is. He hasn't had the right car underneath him or the right team behind him. So I do kind of hope that he comes back But I don't know if it'll be one of those situations where he comes back and he's just a driver for the sake of being a driver, if that makes sense. So yeah.
It's go on, Paris. I can see you about to say something.
Yeah. No, I half agree with Mariam. Like I didn't, as I said, I didn't really like Seb. Mariam made me see him in a different light, and I think he himself made me see him in a different light. The way he acted throughout 2021, no, throughout 2020 even, I think that's when I kind of started warming up to him a little bit. When, you know, Lewis was kneeling and he was also kind of supporting Lewis and stuff. So I think I saw that and I was like, okay, cool, maybe you're not as bad as I once thought. And I appreciate the last few races. I think he really brought it. And I think Aston Martin's trajectory this year, where they've slowly made gains in their car, and you know, both drivers in Aston have really kind of been excelling for an Aston in that sense. You know, they've both really kind of driven well the last few races. Seb gave us an amazing set of corners with Alonso in, I want to say Singapore, but it was one of the last few races when him and Alonso were kind of, you know, chopping and changing and showing us how they do it. I feel like it was Singapore, it might have been Suzuka. And
I think it was Singapore.
Yeah. I think it was Singapore, yeah. Genuinely, I think he was showing that, you know, I'm going, but I can still drive. You know, I could, if I wanted to, I could stay and I could still eke it out a little bit longer, but I'm leaving now and I'm taking my respectable kind of leave from the sport. And I think people might be seeing it as like, you know, he's gone downhill, but I actually don't think, I think he might have gone down a little bit for Ferrari, and actually he was on a bit of an up, and for him to leave now was just probably a good time. And then, as you said, like Maz, like within what he's been doing outside of the sport and all the kind of you know, the karting with girls, the beekeeping, and you know, it's sustainability and all the different little things that he does. I think it's just nice to see a more rounded Formula One driver. And I like having the differences between someone like Yuki, who is completely just about food and having fun and pissing about with Pierre, and then you've got like other people on the grid. And I think that diversity on the grid is really important. And so in that sense, yeah, I'm actually really sad to see Vettel go, but I think it's like a great time for him to go, to make way for new young blood and new drivers. There's only 20 seats on the grid, right? So to make way for new drivers to come through. And then on to Daniel Ricciardo, I genuinely don't feel that bad. And I feel really bad saying that, but I really don't feel that bad. I predicted in April or May, we did a video about like where Pierre Gasly is going to end up in 2023. And I had a feeling that Pierre was going to try and leave AlphaTauri. And we spoke about like places that he could go. And one of the things that I said was that McLaren will do Daniel Ricciardo Day. I thought it would be to get Pierre Gasly, not to get Oscar Piastri. But I've seen McLaren. I know how they operate. I know how they act. And to be honest, you know, we all know that Danny Rick hasn't necessarily made the best choices with regards to his moves since he left Red Bull. He's also kind of shown that he's not really got the driving acumen to pull himself out of a bad spot. So as much as, yeah, when he's in a great car, he's super talented and he's the last of the late breakers and all that kind of stuff. But actually, does he really have like the technical knowledge and know how to pull a team behind him and be a leader and be the older driver in the sport and kind of excel in that way like some of the other drivers do? And I don't think he has that. So I'm not super sad to see him go. He's still going to be around as well. It's not like he's leaving forever.
It's a good point. I mean, I'm sad to see Seb go. I don't think he's going to come back like Lewis thinks. But on Daniel Ricciardo, one, I'm a massive Danny Rick fan, so I have a bias, which is obvious there. But I do think that he's played his cards well. And the reason I say that is he knew that Sergio Perez would always be under pressure next to Max. I'm not saying that like this is pre-Brazil, so he's always thinking with something in mind. And I thought he was a bit of a weasel, if I can use that word, to turn down the Haas seat. Haas keeps you on the grid regardless of how they treat their drivers, or just Mick. But he's played himself into a reserve role at either Red Bull or Mercedes, likely to be Red Bull, where if this friction with Sergio doesn't stop, or if there's any cause, Horner and Marco can just say, you know what, we're terminating your contract. Liam Lawson doesn't have enough experience. We want Daniel to come in, let's say, from halfway throughout the season. Daniel will come into a race-winning car, knowing that he's got a front end that he can maneuver around, and he's there to pick up victories, if not podiums. And he still believes in his mind he's quicker than Max. Won't be true, obviously, but that's his perspective. And so from that perspective, I feel sad that he's going, but at the same time, I'm expecting to see him on the grid next year at some point. And I don't want to, I'm putting that out into the ether. Daniel Ricciardo will be on the grid at some point in 2023.
Do you think that him jumping in the Red Bull, I mean, he's been out of, he was in McLaren for 2 years and Renault for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been out of a Red Bull for 3 years. The regulations have completely changed. The car is not the same. Do you think he would have the same success if he jumped into a new Red Bull?
No, but I think he'll have some success. And the reason I say that is I just think with Adrian Newey, I don't know what this man's been drinking for the last 70 odd years, 60 something years. I don't need his wife tweeting me. But he has the gift of, apparently, according to Martin Brundle, seeing air. And the way in which he's designed his cars throughout all the regulations has always have a strong front end. And for some reason, that's what Daniel craves. Like, Max says he craves it, but I think people like Daniel, Seb, maybe Fernando Alonso probably crave it a bit more. And if they don't have it, they don't gel with the car. And I think we've seen that with Daniel in particular at McLaren. Like when he made a couple, I think Cyril, sorry, I know we're going off topic, but I think Cyril Abitols made a comment back in 2020 after he left Renault saying that they would have been nowhere without Daniel bringing some technical knowledge to the team as to what they needed it to drive the car in the right direction. Like 19 wasn't great, 20 became like this almost podium chasing / race pace car. So yes, I don't think he's got the full technical knowledge. Don't get me wrong, I'm with you on that. But I do think he would be a success at Red Bull if he was given the chance again. But I know we've got about 2 minutes.
Really interesting.
But that's just me. It's my bias. Like I could be
no. I
could...
genuinely found that really interesting point. Yeah.
I mean, you can disagree. It's not. But I guess with us having about maybe 2 minutes left, hot take for the show today. Would you say, and you don't have to agree, like feel free to speak your truth on this. Would you say that this has been the worst season in recent F1 history? And by recent, I mean maybe the last 5 years, because I'm taking into account the Lewis 2017 year, which was just dominant almost, or even 18. Sorry, that was 18.
Yeah, I was just thinking about 2018, and I feel like it's probably for me between this year and 2018 when it was just a bit of a snooze fest. So I'm going to say no.
Okay.
But
Sure.
I see your point.
No, fair enough.
I think for me it's 2018.
Ooh, okay.
I do remember like genuinely falling asleep on some of the races in 2018, but I did not have to stay awake for races because I was not content creating at the time. So I think there's a few of the races this year that I would have fallen asleep from if I didn't have to sit there and take notes. So for me, also I loved seeing Lewis win when I think there was a race in like 2018 where he put like 30 seconds on the second car and he almost lapped whoever was behind him, which could have been Bottas. I can't remember, but I kind of enjoyed that at the time. I wasn't one of the people who was like, get rid of this Mercedes, it's won everything. I was like, yeah, come on, give me more. So for me, definitely this year, just because Max dominated from so early, and I think that was more the issue, is that like we knew he was going to win from nearly the beginning, and as much as Mercedes has dominated in seasons, I think the competition, even if it was just between like Bottas and Hamilton or somebody else, like it's been pushed a lot further into the year.
Yeah, I agree. I think both of you have strong points because 2018 was a snooze fest, but at the same time, we had Ferrari bringing the heat. Then we had Mercedes doing that rapid development, which only they seem to be able to do. Well, Red Bull as well, to be fair. And then Lewis sort of walked it from about Monza, if I'm correct.
That's like post
summer break.
Summer break. Do you know what I mean? Whereas Max kind of had it from pre-summer break.
Oh yeah. Max was, the minute I saw him win in France, I was like, okay, cool. Charles has crashed. Time to go home. We're not watching this any longer. Last question for you both. And you have about maybe 10 seconds, so I'm putting you on the spot. Will Ferrari win the championship next year?
Yes.
No.
Oh, I was hoping for consensus, but I'm with you. I think they will. Will Lewis win a race next year?
Yes.
Yes.
Will George Russell finish above Lewis Hamilton in the standings?
No.
Yes.
Ooh, spicy take. Okay, that's going in the thumbnail. And where can my listeners find you both?
At On The Chicane on every platform: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, which isn't very used that often, and YouTube. We are on all those 4 platforms. Go check us out and interact with us, and hopefully we'll be in touch with you guys too.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. And as they mentioned, go check them out on OnThe Chicane, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Miles.
Thank you.